Alright, Demon Souls. Back to the beginning of the Souls formula. Sometimes referred to as the prototype for Dark Souls. And it had in fact already the majority of the weapon categories that you will find in the later installments. Including fist weapons. Although I could count the amount of options on one hand. I guess appropriately, because none of them can be used with two hands, or dual wielded in any meaningful sense of the word. But the most ironic thing is that the strong attack is the weakest aspect of these weapons. Now, damage wise it's not the worst attack in the game, because there are some extreme low attack ratings out there, like the Needle of Eternal Agony, or hitting things with a toothpick. But with those options you can at least relatively reliably hit something. However, when it comes to the uppercut, just like your fist, your chances of hitting anything with it with any kind of consistency are really up in the air. So that made me wonder, what would it be like to go through the game using the uppercut as my only method for dealing damage? Well, irony of ironies, when you try to do that, you are the one taking it on the chin. Because you either won't hit your enemy at all, or your attack animation will get cancelled long before you could potentially connect, or even when you do hit your opponent, you won't be able to avoid any incoming retaliatory attack. Meaning we keep stacking layers of irony here, because the uppercut is hands down one of the worst attack animations in the entire game. In fact, I can think of only one animation that could be worse. Perhaps someday. So, can you beat the game with only uppercuts? Well, once more, it's ironic that you can't do it while jumping like in DS1, because I'm not sure you can. No, this is a knuckle sandwich that is tainted by the bittersweet taste of defeat. But hey, I'm a challenge runner, so it's up to me to demonstrate that I'm an uppercut above the rest. So let's hope that the lowly suffering servants of the second demonic scourge will keep their chins up, because then I might actually be able to get a hit in once in a while. But I can at least tell you this, in this war against the demonic overlord who rules with an iron fist, the Demon Souls uppercut is definitely not going to give me the upper hand.
Saints and sinners, evangelists at night, fist by fist, sacralize our strife. Heretics and killers, the rats will lead the blind, fist by fist, sacralize we strike. Fist by fist, sacralize we strike.
Okay then, I wasn't exactly sure what a good starting class would be, and despite the fact that I feel like I could do this run with one hand behind my back, my main concern was to have a proper shield equipped, because parrying would give me enough time to use this overly slow attack, or alternatively, make enemies bounce off, which would at least give me a little leeway. However, that very much depends on what kind of enemy and how fast their attack animations are. But more importantly, I would not be able to just fight my way through the stages, so together with soul remains, this would hopefully allow me to simply survive my way through. And I especially had to make sure that I had enough healing crest on hand for the fight against the phalanx. Because when it comes to fist weapons, this game immediately gives you the finger, because none of the free options are available before defeating the phalanx. Now you might be thinking, what about the Hands of God? Because if you use gravity against the blacksmith in the Nexus, he will drop them for you. Well, apart from the fact that they suck and don't even gain any base damage from upgrades, none of the starting classes can wield this weapon, nor can you level up at this point in the game. So we're definitely better off leaving Blacksmith at alive. Or is this one Baldwin? Damn it, now I cannot tell which smith is which smith. Well, actually there is an easy way to distinguish between Ed and Baldwin. See, it works like this. Baldwin is the bald guy, and Ed is the other bald guy. But yeah, the real issue here is that we simply don't have any weapons at all until after the phalanx. Now, I don't know if Boletaria has a similar constitutional right like the American Second Amendment, but I should at least expect the right to bear hands, so we can at least attack without using any actual fist weapon at all. And to some extent, we can use the environment to our advantage, or push enemies away with my shield. But just like I said back in my Soul Level 1 guide, Demon Souls level design contrary to the later installments, is not really that well suited to running past all enemies. In fact, even speedruns focus on blasting through everything, using overpowered magic. Well, we'll have to make it work somehow. And apart from using the environment to our advantage, we might be able to get a helping hand from a certain somebody, who actually desires our help instead. But perhaps we can bring out his inner courage by nudging him into the right direction. Well, Lestrava, don't worry about it.
Ah! You told me not to worry about it! I should have been worried the whole time!
Oh look, he's also making use of the environment. That's a smart fella, which is better than a fart smeller.
My thanks for your brave rescue.
Well, you better thank me, I did all the work here. Or something. Well, since he doesn't rely on the stupid uppercut, yeah, I'm sure he can handle himself. But that means I'm on my own again. So I'll have to be courageous enough to avoid the many enemies still ahead of me. And I know it can be pretty bold, but a rolling stone is bolder. Fortunately, I know this game like the back of my hand. However, I didn't even know this, to be honest. But if you are fast and nimble enough, you can weave yourself in between all the soldiers on the bridge and make it at least, well, sort of safely to the other side, before the dragon even has time to show up. Now, normally I would walk back to the Nexus after opening the gate to the boss, but since I wanted to keep the few souls I had, since every single healing item would be valuable, moreover there were more pickups on the way down, I did in fact try to make my way down. And I thought I got myself stuck, however you can roll onto the staircase on the left. So surprisingly, not only did I make it, but I only had to use a single soul remain. And with my remaining souls, and a whole bunch of poppable souls, I made sure to get as many healing items as I could. Because let's face it, my hands are tied, and I have no other choice but to knuckle down. Well, rather knuckle upwards, I guess. But what it simply comes down to is that I had to use this absolutely worthless attack to take on the... I actually never even counted the amount of hoplites that protect the phalanx. But it's somewhere between 13 and Graham's number. And speaking of numbers, apparently the knight starting class is 1 damage short of defeating a single hoplite with 3 uppercuts. Meaning that it would take 4 attacks per enemy. At least when hitting them from behind. Not to mention that they can heal when they reattach to the boss. And you need to kill them or else they are in turn capable of healing the boss's health bar. And sure, a single hit I could handle. But multiple hits at once can lead to some nail-bitingly tense moments. Not to mention that they can knock you out of your healing animation as well. So you have to play things extremely carefully. You cannot just mindlessly tank your way through with this attack. Because under these circumstances, they are better at tanking than you are. So, let's just uppercut to the chase. How freakishly long does this fight take under these circumstances? Well, 32 minutes. And remember, that is just to get started with the playthrough. Oh, and just for my Dutch viewers, I have a little extra wordplay just for them. Want ik mag toch wel zeggen dat ik de baas er phalanx gegeven heb. Okay, nobody else could understand that, but that was really relatively funny. So, now, with all the art stones unlocked, and the ability to level up, I increased my dexterity to 14 and went to the Tower of Latria, because now we could finally get our hands on the first actual fist weapon. And that's a good thing, because without it we wouldn't stand a chance against the Mind Flayers. However, they in turn don't stand a chance against my confusing Mind Tricks, which basically boils down to wearing the Thieves Ring, which completely breaks their AI, like most enemies in this game. Bit of a design flaw, but a beneficial one. But by doing that, I was able to get my hands on the first actual fist weapon. And no, I was not going to test the damage on the Maiden in Black, since it's better to not cut the hand that feeds you. But now then, by acquiring the claw, I could finally wave my hands in the air like I just don't care. Well, what the hell? Well, that's quite a punch in the nuts. That's definitely way lower than I expected. I think we should focus on upgrading first. Speaking of which, I was in luck, and spoiler alert for the rest of the playthrough, extremely in luck, that I managed to get this crystal lizard stuck. Because as it turned out, crystal lizards are the worst enemies in this entire playthrough. But since I somehow managed to hit this one consistently, I was in fact able to upgrade to +3 already. So that's quite a difference. So as you can see, now I do... Yeah, despite the fact that I'm literally stabbing with this attack, it still counts as slash damage. Which sounds logical since claws do slash damage, but swords deal standard damage. However, when it's a stabbing animation, it does turn into pierce damage. But for whatever reason, not with this weapon. Yeah, thank you From Software, but I guess that's ironically, appropriately, quite underhanded. Well, one way around that would be a magic buff. However, I didn't have enough souls for that. Well, not to worry, the hoplites in stage 1-2 also drop Sharpstone, and while farming for those, I could acquire the souls needed for the magic buff. However, the thing is that although the damage improved, that mattered less than you might think. Because god damn it is it awkward as fuck to fight with this absolutely worthless attack animation. It's even less reliable than the pike charge in TS1. And if you've seen that video, that should tell you something. Oh, and to make it worse, making enemies bounce off your shield is also not reliable. Not all attacks do in fact bounce off, or even leave the enemy vulnerable for a long enough time to begin with. And I don't even have the words to describe how awful it is to fight dogs or enemies with, well, prototype poise. Oh my god, this is foobar beyond all recognition. And it's only going to get worse. Because there are also enemies that you simply can't fight. Basically, their very existence will cancel your attack animation. So, distracting enemies with soul remains is definitely the better option. Not the ideal option. Far from it. Especially since I only have a limited amount at this point. But it would at least allow me to reach one of the two shortcuts. Not the lower cut, but the uppercut. Which leads to the second blacksmith. And you can in fact tell that this one is Ad, because it's the other bald guy. However, when it comes to upgrade materials, killing the guys with sacks, S-A-C-K-S, yeah? Is that okay? Hopefully my accent will save me. But those give you a lot of stones, however they don't respawn. And farming those other mining trolls, well, especially with the dogs around, yeah, I'll just have to be satisfied with a +5 weapon for now. However, with the fire lizards and even more dogs ahead, I basically just had to make a run for it. Unfortunately, I didn't have that many healing items left for the Duke's Deer prototype, but at least the Thieves Ring helps you to get close before it can even start firing, well, fire. Regardless, I would need an actual attack opportunity, but my attack was too slow. Not even blocking with my shield instead of rolling through the attack would work, meaning that my only damage opportunity was when the spider falls down, making for a very slow fight. And speaking of my shield, I actually would have died here if I hadn't had one. Because if you get webbed, that will be your only saving grace. In general, this was the type of playthrough where good old-fashioned shield-based Souls gameplay was the way to go. In fact, in this specific case, because of my shield, I actually could afford to attack twice in a row. Still a slow fight of course, but nowhere near as bad as the absolute torture that my previous run was. Of course, back then I wasn't even able to use a shield. And, well, speaking of absolute torture, remember what I said about crystal lizards and how RNG dependent it is whether you can kill them at all with this attack? After all, if you whiff, they can easily disappear before you can hit them again. And there are two things to remember about how they function in Demon Souls. One, you need them to get enough chunks. And two, they only spawn a finite amount of times. Although world tendency does play a part in that as well, but that's of course an issue with Flame Lurker being the boss of this area. Ironically, the red phantoms were quite doable since you can parry them. In fact, I even managed to proc the bleed effect. I mean, it is an uppercut after all. Wow, yeah, so powerful. Yeah, bleed was absolutely worthless in this game. Poison was already a bad damage over time effect. Bleed was just a weaker version of poison. But what is very worthwhile is that they drop dragon and clearstone chunks. Now, the claws cannot be infused with fire unfortunately. And the remaining fist weapon, the iron knuckles, are a rare drop from the bare-handed miners. So farming for those, I didn't even bother with that. Moreover, I would do more damage with magic buffs anyway. I mean, fire doesn't skill after all. But given that I now had clearstone chunks, I decided to upgrade to quality instead. However, that required me to use a meltstone to reset back to 0. Well, let's just go with that. So, and god damn it, now I don't have enough sharpstones for +3 again. So, back to the stupid hoplites. But at least the positive thing is that you only need 6 chunks in total for a max weapon when going for quality infusion, and we already had 3 of them. So how would we get the other 3? That's the neat thing. You don't. And then of course the lizards stop respawning after all that effort. Yeah, I was about to explode from frustration, among other things. Well, at least now I've had some hands-on experience with this attack. I did get a little bit better at fighting the fat minister, so that helped a bit with healing items. But I somehow got worse at farming the miners, so once again, the claw would be my only weapon this playthrough. And I would really want to get them to max. Alright, one more chance for chunks. Come Crystal Lizard, drop them. No, drop... No, not drop down. Now I have to go all the way around to get down there.
Much later.
And no chunks. So we're pretty much stuck for pretty much the entire rest of the playthrough with a +4 weapon. Well, given how terrible it is to fight anything at all with this attack, soul remains might be more important anyway. And therefore I went into World 4, since Blight sells them infinitely after freeing him from his cell. And despite their slash resistance, it only took 2 hits per skeleton. Wow, what a shock. Now, first I want to quickly make my way to the Adjudicator. And what could be more appropriate this playthrough than to take the upper shortcut? And you wouldn't think that Benny Big Nipples here would ever pose any kind of a threat in any playthrough. But believe it or not, in my previous challenge run, this was one massive obstacle in any sense of the word. Well, massive and obstacle, both words. However, this time around it wasn't so bad, because we finally encountered an enemy that attacks slower than I do. And yeah, sure, the hit detection was still a bit wonky, making the fight even slower, but as long as you don't get stuck, it was basically just a matter of patience. So yeah, that's pretty handy. However, rescuing Blight should have been easy in theory, but not necessarily in practice. Because I can take on these skeletons one by one, but trying to uppercut 2 of them at once, yeah, then things quickly get out of hand. Meaning I had to very carefully lure one of them back without alerting the other. But once I did, I was able to free Blight from his cell, which in turn makes him relocate to World 4-2, where he will sell you infinite soul remains, and on top of that, a whole bunch of healing grass. And speaking of soul remains, I could basically get through the stage the same way I would do in most other runs. Gravitying the skeletons, yeah, that's a verb in my opinion, and then distract the laser ghosts with soul remains. Although I must say, it's actually kind of insulting that the melee ghosts still have faster and more consistent uppercut animations than I do. Somehow. But hey, I'm sure that won't be an issue against the old hero, because that fight becomes a complete non-issue when wearing the featuring. Problem is that with the uppercut, it becomes nonsense. Because what the hell is up with the hitbox of this stupid attack? You have to be so close that you essentially uppercut his pubic hair. However, when you try to do that, that can push you in front of him, even when attacking from behind. Allowing him to uppercut this fight short, and allow me to experience the lack of shortcut in this stage, in order to get another attempt at the boss. Not to mention how terrible my damage output was, way lower than I expected. In fact, not even adding some palm grease made that much difference, despite this boss not being particularly magic resistant. Meaning that this was a long fight with some unexpectedly close calls at times. So fighting the hero this way quickly got older than he is. But that's basically the essence of this entire challenge run. But hey, sometimes you're dealt a bad hand and you just have to roll up your sleeves and not pull any punches, because no one is going to uppercut you a break. Well, with the Storm King there is actually a bit of a break in this run, because obviously I cannot even hit the boss with this attack. So I decided to go with kunai so that I'm at least still throwing something up in the air. However, despite that, I actually managed to get the smaller Storm Beast to eat out of the palm of my hand. Twice, in fact. And I have no idea how that even happened. To be fair, I've never even seen a melee kill on these enemies before. I guess that is quite of an achievement in and of itself, even though it was not exactly intentional. So despite requiring kunai for the actual boss, I still was pleased as punch. However, that wouldn't exactly last that long, given how many troublesome areas still were ahead of me. And therefore I decided to get the easier part out of the way first, and with an archdemon defeated, that meant access to World 1-3, after using some soul remains to make my way to the Knight Reborn, since the Penetrator soul can be turned into a more powerful magic buff. And I would evidently need that, because when you miss so many attacks, the ones that do connect should do enough damage to compensate. And remember that we still do not have a fully upgraded weapon. Now, despite that, I did get a little bit more of a feel at this point for fighting with this awkward attack, when it came to spacing and timing, or for the physics aficionados among us, space timing. Although the soldier still had the advantage and the ability to lemon me out of nowhere. And therefore soul remains were the better option for the most part. Although of course, still quite risky. However, they can even be helpful when you do want to fight specific enemies, like the ones needed to save Ostrava again. After all, I wouldn't stand a chance against these pretty high-skilled enemies, especially not when they attack me all at once. However, by distracting them with soul remains, I could manage to sneak my hits in. Perhaps not the most elegant way to fight, but it did get the job done. And on one hand it's a good thing that Ostrava survived, since he gives you a pure clearstone. But on the other hand, that's kind of meaningless without 3 additional chunks that I still needed. And yes, technically they can drop from the spies in this stage, but that's such a low drop rate that that's simply not feasible. However, if we can manage to defeat the Penetrator, we can get our hands on a light weapon, which is a stronger magic buff. Oh, and speaking of the Penetrator, something that absolutely screwed with my mind was when I was watching an Liam Loyce video, and she showed that if you drop down at this specific spot, you can actually pick up the penetrating sword before fighting the boss. In all these years, I have never known about that. I always thought that you can only get it from his Red Phantom version. But this means you can actually get 2 per playthrough. Yeah, it's a shame that you cannot truly dual wield in this game, because then you would have some nice double okay, yeah, never mind then. Alright. Sandwich? Well, you would think that this boss would be no problem, given how limited his moveset is. But, no. On the contrary, despite his limited moveset, there were 0 safe attack opportunities. The only thing that could result in me not taking damage was literally when the boss simply happened to not attack me. Meaning pure RNG. Initially it appeared like the actual penetrating move was safe, but no, that one as well was just based on pure RNG. Whether the boss chose to follow up or not. Well, then again, hey, at least he cannot do the penetrating move twice in a row. He's doing it twice in a row! What the hell? Yeah, and that's a problem, because that way I couldn't just tank my way through the fight. But that was the whole problem. I had no choice but to tank my way through the damage. Otherwise, ironically, I'm screwed. And therefore I had to go and farm for more healing items, but more importantly, because I would inevitably get penetrated at some point, I would need some protection. And therefore I used a Stone of Ephemeral Ice, so that I could counter his impressively immense Impaler with my own massive, giant, thick, throbbing, veiny health bar. And yes, I could in fact survive that attack now. Barely, but hopefully that would be enough. Wow, well that was pretty fucked up. But hey, at least now we can get a significant reward. Because by going back to the Tower of Latria and limb-biscuiting my way past the arrows, I could acquire the key to Sage Freyk's cell, which in turn gives us access to the magic buff Light Weapon. Symbolizes the Penetrator's gigantic sword. Yeah, he has a big one, I felt that. I mean, come on. Whoever wrote this description knew exactly what they were doing. And to be fair, what better way to test it out than on the real version of the actual Penetrator, who ironically is way easier to hit than his demonic reflection. Actually, I had an additional reason for getting this specific spirit out of the way, because I needed to make some space in order to have safe enough access while wearing the Thieves Ring to at least attempt to get the chunks from the crystal lizards here. Emphasis on attempt. But what do you know? I actually did it! And it's the wrong type of chunks. Oh, damn it, I never should have gone for Clearstone in the first place. And the worst thing is that without any Meltstone, which I cannot farm because the fire lizards immediately cancel my attack simply by touching me, and farming a new set of claws from Spice would take ages, since the drop rate is very low, and therefore I couldn't make use of any other upgrade path either. Well, at least the Fool's Idol is the only boss that is truly magic resistant, and she has very little HP to begin with. So let's hope that Light Weapon would at least be enough of a damage boost. And of course, apart from that, because of the scaling, her damage output isn't that great either. So as long as you don't get stuck in one of the traps, you should be fine. Although I did almost get out uppercut by the followers who were angry that they lost their waifu. I feel like there is some sort of a Twitch comparison to make here, but regardless, for now, that's not even that important. Because once again, damage output doesn't make this attack any less awkward to use. And next up is the massive onslaught of enemies in Proto Blighttown. Relying on attacks at all is just not the way to go here. This area is all about making clever use of soul remains. And to be honest, wow! I surprisingly managed to make it through without dying once. That is certainly unexpected. Now, fair enough, it was luck over skill, but hey, luck favors the prepared. And I suppose that the massive amount of suffering that I did experience in the previous run in this stage has prepared me quite well. So now I've managed to reach the boss in one try. Just like my fist, things are finally looking to go upward. What the freaking hell? What is that? What? Oh my god! No! I know I can be a bit ham-fisted, but now I'm shaking mine in justifiable anger and with righteous indignation. And this stage has no shortcut, neither a lower nor an uppercut. So, after making it to the boss again, I dropped down at the correct place. Because I thought I would have to make use of my usual hit, run and hide strategy. But I suppose I've gotten too used to being at level 1, because none of that was necessary this time. Given that the Leechmonger does so little damage that you can just heal your way through, while out-damaging his healing. I suppose that is in a sense a flaw in this game, the way the stages are skilled compared to each other. But the thing is that I basically didn't require any strategy at all. All I had to do was to tell the Leechmonger to go and suck it. Now, ironically, wow, I really say ironic a lot in this script, Jesus. Now, ironically, in the actual swamp itself, you can prevent getting swamped by moving through the swamp, or better said, around it, which allows you to avoid every single enemy. At least as long as you switch from the Regenerator to Thieves Ring near the fork walls. And once you can get up the rafters, you can rely on soul remains, however be careful since the enemies can literally come out of the woodworks. But in the remake you can actually get a bird's eye perspective using camera mode. Which on a side note is also an actual method for pausing a Souls game. Meaning that you cannot die while using it. Since, well, the cameraman never dies. However, somehow the flying insects can actually block your way with their strangely large hitboxes, which are also in a weird way too small for you to hit them. These are just hands down the worst enemies to raise your fist against, and not in a way I can make sense of. Regardless, now it was time to get my hands dirty with the Colossus. Once again in a fight that's not a big deal when you can tank damage, and it's even noticeable how much easier it is to dodge through his arm swings compared to the 30 FPS, lack of multi-directional rolling, and simply added jank of the original. Speaking of which, I have heard people claim that burning away the flies was removed in the remake, which is not true at all. However, also don't underestimate the random flies coming from his head. Yes, the Dirty Colossus has in fact a head, and yes, occasionally random flies come out of there, and even when you can tank damage they can still be dangerous since they can knock you out of your healing animation. So you still have to be careful of that. However, if you stick behind him, you can just hit him right in his diaper. And for whatever reason he was dancing near the end. Dirty dancing perhaps, having the time of his life. A life that I specifically uppercut short. Then again, maybe he was just having a seizure or something. I mean, when I'm dancing, it's hard to tell the difference, so who can really say? Now, given how parable enemies are basically the only ones that you can hit consistently with the uppercut, Gall Vinland would appear to be one of the easier encounters. Well, in theory yes, but in practice no. Because first of all, I needed many parries in a row in order to get enough attacks in. But more importantly, you need to get behind him in order to block his way. However, he can parry you as well. So you cannot just risk attacking at random. And the thing is that he really wants to break free to go back to his queen. And when he does, he can heal, stand right in the pool of plague, even use God's Wrath, or he can two-hand his weapon, which is a much faster animation, which really tends to throw off my parry timing. So at that point I was just wasting healing items, and therefore I actually decided to quit out, restock and try again. Unfortunately, if you mistime your parry and you panic roll, he can actually roll catch you. And no matter how hard I tried, he still managed to break free. So if Lady Luck hadn't dealt me a good hand, because I just happened to be able to interrupt his healing, and he happened to be in the right spot for me to not get plagued, and he just happened to do the right moves for me to beat him to the punch. I come up, miss, chin up so I can land my I mean, you're in safe hands now, so okay, I think she just decided to punch her own ticket instead. Hey, oh, that has nothing to do with me. So I'm washing my hands clean of this mess. Or better said, have the fires of hell purge them clean. Because now we have to face the most literal demon of them all. And remember, still without a fully upgraded weapon. And it really sucks because if I would have been able to upgrade, that would have given me a 17% damage increase, which is quite significant. However, damage output wasn't really the issue here. In fact, due to his extreme weakness to magic, my buff would actually double my damage output. In fact, you might not even suspect what the real issue was here. It was my lack of stamina. Because in order to get a damage opportunity with such a slow attack, it would help to first block his attack. However, he would easily guard break me. Heck, merely touching him could already interrupt my attack animation. So, how could I even get damage in with any kind of consistency in the first place? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, no reason to fling my hands up in despair. I guess the answer is that it was simply time for the lame lurker strategy. Yeah, it's a bit boring, but this is Demon Souls after all. And the Thieves Ring can make enemies act all punch drunk in a way that no amount of uppercutting could ever amount to. In other words, if you break his AI, you can be the one doing the lurking. Simply sneak up behind him, claw his calf, and hide away like a strategist. Then all you have to do is rinse and or repeat. Preferably both, and in equal amounts. Preferably. Wait, is it preferably or preferably? Well, I don't really have a preference. Well, Dragon God is in principle the same non-fight in any playthrough. However, instead of just hand-waving it away, I decided to simply treat the pillars as if they were enemies and only break them using the uppercut as well. And surprise, surprise, it really sucks at breaking the pillars. Not only does it require 4 hits, at least if all your attacks connect, but half the time you can't even hit the rubble to begin with. The further it's broken, the worse the hit action becomes. However, once again, I was able to tank my way through, which you really wouldn't expect to be possible. But the thing is, I could literally survive getting punched, somehow. And he's not even doing an uppercut. In fact, the same thing applied to getting burned. Although in all fairness, I was wearing the flame resistance ring. So no matter how clumsily I was making my way through, as long as I didn't run out of grass, I could still make it work. So basically here we have this ginormous god of dragons desperately trying to smoke this bumbling flaying buffoon, but getting outsmoked due to the amount and quality of herbs that, well, that they possessed. Hopefully legally in the land of Boletaria, I don't know. So yeah, no wonder he couldn't hold his chin up anymore. Although, despite that, I still couldn't avoid taking damage, even at this stage in the quote-unquote fight. I mean, if that doesn't show how incredibly worthless this attack is. But despite of that, now you can see why in the AoE only challenge, I chose to be at SL1. Because someone actually commented back then that it would have been better if I had just leveled up. Yeah, sure, that would have decreased the amount of suffering significantly, obviously. However, nearly all of the problem solving would have been negated that way, if I had the ability to just tank my way through. So that's basically the point that we reached in this playthrough. Well, that's of course only partially true, because speaking of solving problems, I obviously failed at uppercutting down the crystal lizard along the way. Because this one is in fact one that drops clearstone chunks. However, I had more chances now because it would respawn a few more times. Come on! Come on! No! Please, just work. Just hit. And hit consistently. Whoa, I did it! I did it! I did it! And it's still one short. It drops 2. I needed 3. Son of a bitch! Okay, one more chance. One more chance. Yes! Ah! Yes! And suddenly, life has new meaning to me. Ah, finally. Okay, let's bring this to one of the blacksmiths. The bald one or the other bald one, I don't even care anymore at this point. We finally did it. We have a maxed out knocker upper. And that's a very good thing, because now we have to go into Upper Latria to deal with the... Oh, damn it. Dealing with 2 bosses at the same time with a substantial amount of health. And what the hell? You see, this is why they are called centipedes, because they are taking the piss 100 times over. But anyway, as I was saying, in principle we have to fight 2 bosses at the same time. However, we don't have to face both man-eaters at the same time, as long as you first hide out on this little ledge wearing the thieves ring. Because then you can sneak behind him and make your way to the end of the bridge where the second one will appear. And that way you can fight the second one first and the first one second. Now I did take the risk of going into human form. However, they do surprisingly little damage per hit. Once more, I guess I'm just too used to playing on SL1 in this game. And on top of that, I was using Garl shield that has 100% magic resistance. Because the thing is, if you cannot take any damage, these bosses can turn into a nightmare. However, with a decent amount of health, they can actually turn into a bit of a joke. And hey, I am allowed to make fun of them. After all, I am the one punching up here. They are the one punching down. Regardless, they do leave themselves open quite a bit. Especially before getting an upper tail cut. Given that they are especially vulnerable during their very lengthy buffing animation. Now, speaking of very lengthy, it took ages to get the final hit in. Since the second man-eater just kept flying around and dashing away before I could get the final hit in. But eventually, and I mean eventually, I was awarded the title of Man-Eater Beater. So, after beating off 2 men, gluk 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 gluk, that's some good punch, eaters, only the 2 King Alans and of course the old monk remained. You know, in a way I kind of wish that I could have saved the old monk for last, because then I could have said it's a wrap after beating him. Regardless, there is still something special about fighting the NPC version. After all, he is using the claws as well. Kind of a shame that it's a phantom NPC though, because if it was the old man using claws, we could have called him Santa Claus. But regardless, he can actually use the uppercut as well. Not to great effect as you might expect, but the problem with his regular attacks is that I am forced to parry them, and that's quite tricky to time. Because merely making him bounce off my shield doesn't provide a large enough attack window. On top of that, it's not pure hand-to-hand combat, because of his random magic projectiles. And yes, those act independent from the boss's own actions. However, remember that I'm using the silver shield, so unless they happen to strike mid-attack animation, I can block them without taking any chip damage. All in all, this was a very awkward looking fight, where both of us were seemingly randomly flailing around like a bunch of old monkeys. But to reiterate once again, with the massive amount of healing items in this game, as long as you're capable of tanking through attacks, you pretty much will be able to tank through the attacks. Once again, I'm often asked why I tend to add arbitrary restrictions to most of my runs. Well, that's because if you don't, then usually the problem-solving aspect of a run can disappear rather quickly. Production-wise, very pragmatic of course, because it shortens the run, but from a challenge perspective, it leads to less interesting content, if you ask me. Of course, a healthy balance is usually the best approach. However, having said that, in this case, I'm not saying that it would have been impossible without tanking through, but as you have seen, I at least don't know of any way to get past certain parts without taking damage in the process. And False King Aland was yet another example of that, because once more, when on earth can you attack him without taking damage in the process, other than just pure luck where he just happens to not do a counterattack? Of course, not to mention his glitchy charge attacks, as you are probably well aware of. Now, you would think that the giant AoE would be the best attack opportunity. In theory, yes. In practice, not necessarily. Because how in the actual fuck does that not connect? Well, it can connect, but only when it feels like it. So again, you know the drill. It's about tanking your way through. You know what? By now, I should have a steady hand on the tiller. So I think that's about time for a proper punchline, in order to uppercut to the end of the video.